All right, so I got four really important things I wanted to talk about today, but getting right into it, the first big thing here that came out yesterday from, it was actually Ezra Levant at the Rebel that dropped it here, but this is from Spencer Fernando saying, in a sane world, Trudeau wanting communist China's troops on Canadian soil would be an end to his political career. Now, again, is anything going to come out of this? No. And again, I'm sure pretty much everyone's heard by now. They went very viral yesterday, was trending on Twitter. I mean, it still is trending on Twitter by the looks of things. And again, like, I don't think this is as big of a story as what some people would have you think. Should it end his political career? I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of the other things he's done. Um, but nonetheless, it is a terrible move. And then why in the world would you want this? Like, and this is the one thing too that I thought to myself is that do we really think that Justin Trudeau is playing 4D chess here? Like, do we really believe that? And I think that's obviously highly unlikely to anyone paying attention. So I don't think Justin Trudeau is playing 4D chess here. I really don't. He's clearly not good at strategy whatsoever, right? He's clearly not good at strategy whatsoever, right? And if he was, then where are all these amazing deals that he's pulled off? Like, where are they? Like, they don't exist. Like, if anything, it's the opposite. If anything, he's the one getting screwed over, and I think that would be the one that I would argue. So I don't think that's the case. So again, what is the play here? Like, what is the play here? I don't know. I think it's just I think the most likely scenario is Justin Trudeau is just flexing his sympathy for communism. Now again, to the average leftist, they'll scoff when they hear that. To a lot of people on the right, they think he's a full-on communist, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think he's just one of these, which is a lot of leftists. They're not necessarily a communist, but they're very sympathetic towards communism. And this is the big thing that you see with a lot of these leftists is that they'll always deny being a communist. Which again, I don't think a lot of these people are. I think actual full-on communists are few and far between. But what they'll always do is that they'll usually downplay. They'll usually skirt away from the issue. All this kind of stuff. Like that's what they do. They kind of just beat around the bush. And again, I think that's what Justin Trudeau does. And that I don't necessarily think communism is the final play in his mind, but I think pushing that way is what he wants. Like, and they're clearly pushing that way, right? Like within the last, like if you'd have told people like a year ago where we are at right now in society, no one would have taken you seriously, me included, right? And I'm someone who's seen a lot of this stuff coming. Like I didn't think it was going to be nearly this fast, but I still would have told you you're crazy. Like the charter is basically meaningless now. You can't travel, right? I mean technically, I mean, you could if you really wanted, but you can't. I mean the Atlantic provinces literally have the borders closed off, right? I mean free speech is pretty much, I mean, technically it kind of exists, but can you go to a rally right now? I mean, you can, but the mainstream media is going to smear you. Politicians are going to put out tweets and posts smearing you. So, like I say, this is the problem nowadays is that you kind of still have the rights, but you really don't. Like you really, unless the government is defending it to the nth degree, you don't have them. Unless the courts are holding it up, you don't have it. Like this is the thing. Like if we still had free speech, if we still had our charter rights, um, any one of these protests that's been shut down, any of these church services, stuff like that, what would happen is they'd take the government to court and they'd win overwhelmingly, right? They'd win overwhelmingly. But has that been happening? With the church one, the one in Manitoba, they did because I think it's so blatantly obvious it's not even funny. Like this was a drive-in church service. This wasn't even an in-person church service. But again, like either you have freedoms or you don't. There's no middle ground. There's no asterisk saying, you have free speech or the right to peaceably assemble or the right to I don't know what the travel one. I don't know exactly what the exact wording is, but the right in the charter that says you have the right to basically the right to travel where you please in Canada, right? Um, We don't have any of those things, right? We don't have any of those things. But again, the thing that you have to bring up to a lot of these people is that there's no asterisk. There's no asterisk saying unless the government declares a state of emergency. There's no asterisk, right? Again, it's just absolute insanity that's going on right now. And I'm going to get into it a little bit more down the road, especially getting into this post here from Paul Joseph Watson. Now, he points out something like, I mean, something that I've been pointing out, but again, he puts it in a very, very good way, saying, was there a time in history where ruthless ideological conformity was so brazenly disguised as moral righteousness? Now, I don't know. Like, again, I'm not a history expert, like by any means, but I would venture to guess the answer to that question is no. And if you want to say yes, then I don't think there's much of a difference, because this is the problem these days, is that what's considered morally righteous nowadays is not allowing free speech, not allowing the right to peaceably assemble, not even allowing people to work a job, right? Not allowing people to have a livelihood. Like, we have people, a pretty good percent of the population, I don't think it's a majority, but this is what I always bring up too, is that they say, oh, what about Australia? You know, they locked down and it worked great. Again, but that's very, very misleading to say the least. In that, number one, when Australia locked down, they had a very, very low amount of cases compared to us, like an incredibly low amount of cases. So again, if you lock down with 100 active cases, it's going to be easier to get rid of it than if you lock down with whatever we're at now. What is it? I think it's a little over 10,000. So again, all that's very obvious, right? And again, even the lockdown zealots would admit that. But again, they live in such an echo chamber that they actually think that we're a fair comparison. The other thing about Australia too is that they're an island. It's a lot like in Canada. We still have flights coming in from foreign countries. At no point have we stopped flights coming in from foreign countries. And here's the other big thing they don't tell you about Australia is that they are literally arresting people for making Facebook posts that are questioning the narrative. They are literally arresting people for walking their dogs alone. Is that a world you want to live in? Is that seriously a world you want to live in? I don't care how deadly the virus is. That even if you told me that 10 million Canadians were going to die, um, again, obviously hypothetical situation here. Even if you told me 10 million Canadians were going to die of this if we didn't lock down, I still wouldn't support it because it makes no sense. There's no justification behind it. You don't get to say, oh, it's immoral to do something, so what we're going to do is we're going to do something very immoral. That's not how, there's no logic behind that whatsoever. So, anyway, um, yeah, like ideological conformity so brazenly disguised as moral righteousness. This is the entirety of these people's argument. Their arguments that it's never about an argument with these people. It's never about debate. It's always about conformity. It's always about conformity, and that the amount of just outright brazen lies that these people say, and that number one, again, I've heard so many of these people say that there's a clear correlation between lockdowns and a reduction in cases. That's so false. It's not even funny. And that the other thing I always bring up with these people too is I'd literally bet them money, right? And it's very funny how people's minds change when I'm like, yeah, you want to bet on that? And I'm serious about it too because I know I'm not wrong about this. And then again, if you gave people a blank sheet with, let's say, 20, 30, 50, 100 areas, and you gave them just all the curves, right? All the curves, and you said, okay, you think that there's a clear correlation between lockdowns and a reduction in cases and mask mandates. Okay, predict which places had lockdowns and when, and nobody would be able to do that. Not even with anything close to a degree of accuracy. And this is the thing: the only way that lockdowns make sense is if you can do that, and nobody could. Not no more and do that with at least 80-90% certainty, right? You it'd be 50-50. If you're just blindly guessing, you'd be just as accurate as someone who thinks that they could. And again, until we can point out a clear correlation between lockdowns and a reduction in cases, and again, cases are kind of meaningless too, so that's another thing that needs to be thrown out as a caveat. But until we can do that, it, we can't do lockdowns. It makes no sense. Like the hospitals have never been overwhelmed, right? If they haven't been overwhelmed up to this point, what makes you think they will again? And even if they are, let's just say they are hypothetically, it's the government's fault and all these idiot doctors' fault for telling us a million times, oh, the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed literally every day, screaming from the rooftops, we got to lock down or the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. Well, we're 8 months into this or whatever we're at now. The hospitals have not been overwhelmed. There's a few here and there that have hit 100% capacity, but that's normal, especially in the wintertime, right? So again, it's just it's just pure insanity. Another very good point from David Samadi here. 5 years from now, you will look back and admit that you spent an entire year of your life wearing a mask, cooped up in your house, and avoiding all the people you love. A year in your life that you'll never get back. Now, again, the first thing I would point out here is that it's not going to be a year, right? It's not going to be a year. Like I point out, this is another thing that I think a lot of people get wrong, especially a lot of people that either reluctantly go along with the lockdowns or maybe they disagree with. This is another common thing I see from people is that they know the mask mandates are BS, they know the lockdowns are BS, but they go along with it because they think it's temporary, right? It's only temporary. But when has it ever been temporary up to this point? When has it been? Right? It hasn't been. So this is something that I think he gets wrong, and that again, I think we're going to be. I think the lockdowns, they'll probably reduce restrictions. I don't know if they will in January or not, specifically in Alberta. I don't know because I don't think it's going to have too much of an effect on cases, and they're going to be stuck between a rock and a hard place. This whole situation is going to look even worse a month from now than it does right now because number one, they're just going to get off basically telling people they can't celebrate Christmas with their family. The cases aren't going to come down a whole lot because a lot of people, number one, a lot of people aren't going to follow the rules, which just completely defeats the purpose, and rightfully so. There's no reason we should have to follow these rules. They make no sense. There's no data that backs it up. And not to mention, too, it's not going to be enough because the people that don't want lockdowns are going to hate it. The people that do want lockdowns, it's not going to be enough for them. So they're going to be even in an even worse spot a month from now than they are down the road. So again, that's something that needs to be pointed out. But again, like I say, the other thing too is that it's going to be more than a year. It's going to be more than a year. It may be something that never goes away. It may be something to where um, it's distinctly possible that over the summer and the spring and the summer and maybe into the fall, the they ease restrictions, but then in the winter time they ramp them right back up again. This may be something that may never go away. Now, will it go away? Probably, but I think the most likely way that it's going to go away is people finally just get tired of it, right? But because again, eventually enough people are going to have to figure out eventually that the lockdowns and the mask mandates don't work. I mean, we've had more than enough data to show that up until this point, but eventually enough people are going to have to figure it out. So and the last very good point from Anthony Fury here, saying one of the most maddening mind games we're enduring right now is politicians in one breath shutting down small businesses with scant justification, and then in the next haranguing us about the need for us to do more to support small businesses. Now, again, this is another one of the things I just can't stand these days. Is that these politicians, they're either incredibly ignorant, like incredibly ignorant, or they have very bad intentions. They have very bad intentions because there's no way you can be this ignorant to destroy small businesses because of policies you implement and then lecture people about supporting small businesses. That's not how it works, right? Again, the goal here is clearly to destroy small businesses. The goal here is clearly to discourage entrepreneurship. The goal is to discourage people working for themselves, bettering themselves. It's clearly either you gotta work for the government or a big corporation, or you're basically screwed, right? That's basically the goal of coming out of this situation, right? And again, like I don't understand why more people aren't up in arms about this kind of stuff. Now, again, from the left's perspective, I get it because from the left's perspective, a successful small business is like the epitome of the free market working because whenever you talk to these people, it's very hard for the average person to relate to like an executive or a president of like a big corporation because how many people actually come across those kind of people in their day-to-day lives? But most of us know someone who runs a small business or who works for a small business, right? Most of us, in fact, probably pretty much everyone knows those kind of people. So that's very relatable. And I think that's why the left hates small businesses so much, is because again, that's the epitome of the free market, because it's not relatable to relate to a big corporation, but it's very relatable to, for a successful small business, because you literally know that person, you know who they are, right? You know that they did it, because if you know someone who did it, chances are you can do it, right? So I think that's where that comes from. And again, from the politician's perspective, it's entirely just brazen, just hypocrisy, narcissism, all this kind of stuff that comes with these kind of people. So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today. If you like the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. If you haven't already, make sure you check out those links below. Follow me on those other platforms. You can donate if you want to do that as well. Again, I appreciate whatever support I can get. So hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.